You may have seen something pop up in your social media feed this week. A reference to a place called Avignon and a very old idea about what happens when a powerful government decides the church needs to get in line. Whether you clicked the story or kept scrolling, here's what I want you to know. The history behind that reference is genuinely wild, and it ends with a monk, a poet, a mystic with an attitude problem, and a schism that wouldn't fully heal for 40 years. I'm Keith Conrad, and this is Sidequests, a podcast where I explore the weird rabbit holes I fall down. Some are historical, some are about what's happening in the news. It turns out this one is a little bit of both. So let's go to France. It's the 14th century. Things are about to get complicated. To understand how the papacy ended up in France, you have to start with the Pope who made it inevitable. Pope Boniface VIII was elected in 1294, and he arrived in the job with an extremely high opinion of the papacy and of himself. By the time he'd been in office a few years, he issued one of the most sweeping declarations in church history, a papal bull called Unam Sanctum, which argued without a lot of wiggle room that the Pope's authority was superior to every earthly king. Every king. All of them. Everywhere. The King of France read this and was not impressed. Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, not because of his temperament, but because of his looks, was exactly the kind of monarch the papacy did not need as an enemy. He was cold, methodical, and completely unintimidated by the spiritual weapons the church had spent centuries sharpening. When Boniface threatened to excommunicate him, Philip sent his agents to the Pope's summer residence at the town of Avignon. They broke in. They beat the Pope. Boniface VIII, the vicar of Christ on earth, the man who had declared himself above all kings, died a month later. The official cause was shock and humiliation. Philip IV faced no meaningful consequences. That was the moment something fundamental changed. For generations, the threat of excommunication had been enough to bring kings to their knees, sometimes literally. Henry IV of the Holy Roman Empire had stood barefoot in the snow for 3 days begging for forgiveness from Pope Gregory VII 2 centuries earlier. But Philip had stared down the full weight of papal authority, sent soldiers to beat up the Pope, and walked away. The spell was broken. After a brief conciliatory papacy under Benedict XI, who lasted less than a year till the cardinals gathered to elect a new pope, they were deadlocked. The French cardinals and the Italian cardinals couldn't agree, and the conclave dragged on for 11 months. Philip the Fair used that time productively. What emerged eventually was a compromise. Bertrand de Got, the Archbishop of Bordeaux, a Frenchman, a personal friend of the king, notably a man who had never been a cardinal, which was unusual enough to raise eyebrows even then. He took the name Clement V. His coronation was held in Lyon rather than Rome, already a concession. Philip himself attended the ceremony. As the new pope made his way through the city in full regalia, a wall along the route collapsed under the weight of the crowd. It knocked Clement off his horse, damaged the papal tiara, and killed his brother and an elderly cardinal standing nearby. If you believe in omens, that one was fairly clear. Clement never went to Rome. He spent the early years of his pontificate drifting through southern France, Bordeaux, Poitiers, Toulouse, before settling in 1309 at a Dominican priory in the city of Avignon. Avignon was technically a possession of the King of Naples, not directly part of France, but it sat on the French border adjacent to papal territory, and everyone understood whose orbit it was in. The entire papal court relocated with him. The administration of the Catholic Church, one of the largest and most complex institutions on earth, picked up and moved to France. It would stay there for 67 years. 7 popes reigned in Avignon. All 7 were French. All 7 operated under the influence, sometimes subtle, sometimes blunt, of the French crown. The papal palace they built there was extraordinary, one of the grandest structures in medieval Europe. It dominated the city's skyline and announced to every visitor that this was a court of serious power. The art was magnificent. The feasts were legendary. Under Clement VI, the 4th Avignon pope, the extravagance reached heights that would have made a Roman emperor uncomfortable. The Italian poet Petrarch, who lived through this period, had a word for it. He called Avignon the Babylon of the West. He described it as a sink of vice and corruption, a place where money and politics had replaced faith as the organizing principle of the church. He was not shy about it. He wrote about it constantly. He was, to put it mildly, not a fan. And the corruption was real. Positions were sold, relatives were appointed. The French cardinals Clement V had installed early in his pontificate ensured that his successors would also be French, which ensured that French interests would remain baked into the institution for decades. But here's where it gets more complicated than the simple corrupt puppet popes story. Some historians argue the Avignon popes were actually capable administrators who used the French base to modernize and centralize the church's bureaucracy in ways Rome had never allowed. They expanded missionary work as far as China. They promoted university education. They tried to broker peace between warring European kingdoms. One of them, Clement VI, kept Avignon open as a refuge during the Black Death, when the pandemic was killing a third of Europe, and offered shelter to Jews being scapegoated for the plague across the continent. So, were they French pawns or pragmatic operators navigating impossible constraints? The honest answer is probably both, and it probably depended on which pope and which decade you were looking at. What isn't in dispute is the price. The longer the papacy stayed in France, the more its universal authority eroded. It was supposed to belong to all of Christendom. Increasingly, it looked like it belonged to one kingdom. The prestige that had survived centuries of conflict and scandal was quietly draining away. And in Rome, without a pope and without strong governance, things fell apart. Rival factions tore the city, the papal states drifted out of church control, the great basilicas deteriorated. Rome, the city that was supposed to be the center of the church, became a cautionary tale about what happens when the institution that defines a place simply leaves. By the 1370s, the pressure to return was intense. And the person who finally applied the decisive push wasn't a king or a general or a rival pope. It was a 20-something woman from Siena who had no formal authority whatsoever. Catherine of Siena had been having visions since childhood and had a reputation for extreme piety and, apparently, a complete absence of patience for institutional cowardice. She wrote letters, dozens of them, to Pope Gregory XI, the seventh and last Avignon Pope, who had been publicly stating his intention to return to Rome for years while finding reasons not to. Her letters did not mince words. She called him out for being surrounded by advisors who told him what he wanted to hear. She told him the church was bleeding. She told him his hesitation was a failure of faith. In one letter she wrote, "Be manly and not fearful." In another she addressed him as Babbo, Papa in the Tuscan dialect, which somehow managed to be both affectionate and withering at the same time. In 1377, Gregory XI finally left Avignon. He packed up the papal court and made the journey to Rome. He arrived in January, the city celebrated. He died 14 months later. What followed Gregory's death was, if anything, worse than what had come before. A disputed election, two men simultaneously claiming to be pope, one in Rome, one back in Avignon. A schism that would split the church for nearly 4 decades, requiring a council of the entire church to finally resolve. That crisis cracked open questions about authority, legitimacy, and the nature of the church that would echo for another century, right up to the moment a German monk named Luther nailed something to a church door. The Avignon Papacy gets taught as a story about corruption, or about the rise of the nation-state, or about what happens when spiritual authority gets tangled up with political power. All of those readings are probably correct, but maybe the lesson we should take from it is simpler. The moment an institution relocates under the roof of a more powerful government, even for understandable reasons, even temporarily, the question of whose interests it actually serves becomes very hard to answer. That question, as it turns out, has a way of coming back around. I'm Keith Conrad, and this is Sidequests, a podcast where I explore the weird rabbit holes I fall down. We release shorter stories like this on Monday and Wednesday, and a deep dive into history on Friday. Our first story in that series will be on the Titanic disaster. Whether you like history or just a good story, I hope you'll give it a listen.